My name's Erica Mills. I run a company called Klaxon. We teach those doing good. So all of you, and then all the people joining us online, we teach you how to get noticed. I have the great good fortune to be, I think it's technically the moderator, but I'm sort of thinking of it as the conversation Sherpa and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about each of these individuals here in a minute, but for Paul Shoemaker, Jane Meseck, Eric Stowe, and then of course Beth Kanter. Before I go any further, though, I would be remiss if I did not say a great big thank you on our collective behalf to Microsoft. Thank you. It is because of Microsoft and their generosity that we are all gathered here today to talk about data transparency and impact. So Paul, when he walked in, said, "So what do you think everybody was so excited about this topic?" And I said, "I don't know. I'm hoping we'll find out. But what I do know is that we ran out of tickets pretty darn quick. So I am really proud that Klaxon, along with Splash and Tenacious Ventures, could team up to bring the live streaming so that more people could have access to what I think is going to be a really great conversation. So I want to invite Colin from Tenacious Ventures up here to explain to us kind of how the live stream is going to work.
Jump. Go and go to the next one as well. I can start with some of it as it's transitioning. But basically, you see down here, we have down at the bottom the live stream link. So I put it so it's really easy to tweet out. So if you want to grab your phones, update your Facebook, even right now, I already checked and we already have 50 people watching the live broadcast right now. So I would love to bump that number up. So if you jump onto your Twitter or Facebook, use the hashtag Kanter, SEA, when you're tweeting. And the link down here, we're going to leave these up here as well, even as the panel is happening, so that you can tweet out and join the online conversation as it's occurring as well. And the one thing to use is when you do tweet out this shortened link, use the capital D and the capital T, because that's also part of the way that it recognizes it. It is case sensitive. So enjoy the show, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the panel has to say. So afterwards, you can find the information. If you go to the Eventbrite page, you'll be able to go on there and see where we post the recorded video afterwards. And also, you can follow this stream here with number Kanter SEA, and I'll even be tweeting out the links to that after the show. So thank you.
Give a round of applause for Colin, Tenacious Ventures, Splash. Thank you. Oh, is there a password for Wi-Fi? Yes, there is, and all is going to be revealed. What is it? Chocolate, all lowercase. Did you guys see the collection of chocolate out front? It's very impressive for those who like chocolate. Okay, so we are here to talk about data transparency and impact. I want to take a couple minutes to introduce you to each of these panelists, and here's why. Because they're going to roll their eyes and turn red and stuff, but I do not think it is an understatement or an overstatement, although I am one who is prone to hyperbole, to say that what we have in front of us are the four people who are doing some of the best and most progressive thinking on this topic anywhere on the planet. So I want to make sure that we maximize our time. Now, I also want to make sure that you actually know the breadth and depth that we have sitting up here. So I'm going to start with Paul. Paul, will you wave to the crowd, please? Paul Shoemaker. Don't look too enthusiastic about your position up there. So Paul is the Executive Director of Social Venture Partners. Social Venture Partners is a global network of individuals, really citizens, who believe that they can make their communities a better place by applying strategic solutions to very complex societal problems. He has been at the forefront of the engaged philanthropy space since the 90s. He went to Nestle and then Microsoft and then got interested and really drove the creation of and then the global proliferation thereof of social venture partners. Lest you think that he's just like all up here, I wanted to share two other tidbits of information about Paul. One is that he is a referee for high school basketball. And this bit I really love, he has said this more than once, that he got married too young, but to the right woman, so it's all worked out. And if you want more on how that all comes together, the data, the transparency, the impact, the marriage, and all that, I encourage you to see his TED Talk, which is rather fabulous. That brings us to Jane Meseck. So Jane heads up Microsoft Citizenship's Tech for Good. She's breathless with anticipation because they actually don't know what I'm going to say about them.
I'm afraid.
Oh, just you wait. Okay, so Tech for Good, Philanthropy, and Microsoft Citizenship. I think of Jane as a very athletic do-gooder with a very strong geek streak. Here are her credentials for that, which is she was voted in high school most athletic, and she was on the women's ultimate frisbee team that took international competition. How many times?
A couple.
Yeah, just whatever, a couple. Like, that's the entire world. They're better than all of them. So that's her athletic side. But she also, let it be noted, was one of the only person in her class, now we're backing up to the 80s here, who used a TRS-80. Does anyone know what that is? Can we have a round of applause for the TRS-80?
Come on.
Yeah, Jane Meseck used it to code a walking stick figure crossing the screen. The only one in her class to complete that, right? Okay, and she did also teach quantitative analysis at the, that's like statistics, most of us just say stats, but it's quantitative analysis, at the University of Washington's Evans School of Public Affairs. So she got her start, she has been with Microsoft for more than 15 years now. She got her start in philanthropy when she was 10, and she raised $15.37 for a local animal shelter, which she felt pretty good about until last summer when her son, at the tender age of 8, outperformed her by raising $200 for the local organization Wellspring.
Yes, he did.
Yes.
Kicked my butt.
Let's round of applause for Jane Meseck. So this brings us to Eric Stowe. So Eric is the founder and currently the director of Splash, where they clean water for kids all around the world. If you want a little insight into just how far Splash is pushing this idea of data transparency and impact, I would encourage you to take a little sneak peek. He'll, I hope, share about this throughout the course of the hour, of provingit.org. Just take a look-see around there, provingit.org. So he has many accolades. We could really spend the entire hour just going over their accolades, all four of these. But, you know, like Pop Tech, Social Innovator, Fellow, Puget Sound Business Journal, 40 Under 40, this list goes on and on and on. But he did not take, as is often the case, a completely linear trajectory towards where we see him sitting up here today. He did take some time off, a decent chunk I hear, in between high school and college, during which he played in punk bands, so worked on sort of his musical repertoire, and then also built up his repertoire of tattoos. So there's that. Mm-hmm.
Direct correlation.
Mm-hmm. But then he also worked directly with the family of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to research for the later years of life. By way of a degree in Chinese studies, he then ended up working for an adoption agency. It was while he was working there full-time that he got a bee in his bonnet to actually decided it was unacceptable that so many kids had unclean water. He started what was then a Child's Right, which has now become Splash. So that's Eric Stowe. And then we come to Beth. I'm going to go, can we just, I mean, you know you just want to go, whoo. Just go ahead, get it out. Yay. Yay. So Beth's presence in Seattle is the catalyst for this conversation. I'm going to go on a limb and say everybody here and who's joining us online knows and loves Beth. So we know that she is a prolific blogger, author of the network nonprofit, and now, little show and tell, Measuring the Networked Nonprofit. For those of you who have not seen it, yes, it's an excellent book. So she has a knack for sharing really useful information, right? She's generous in the way that she shares that. One of the ways that she shares that is through training. Can I see a show of hands? How many people have been in a training with Beth? It's amazing. What most of us don't know is how she got her start. She knows the story I'm about to tell. So Beth's dad is an OBGYN. You kind of know where this is going, don't you? Training OBGYN dad. So now we have Amy Lang's Birds and Bees and Kids.com, so she has the Birds and Bees with Eats scripts for parents. But Beth's dad didn't have that and gave her a very detailed account of how babies are made, which Beth then took. She took notes. She went down to the corner with her easel and her colored pens, for which she is now famous, and she proceeded to teach all the neighbor kids how babies are made. And thus was launched her career as a trainer. Imagine the delight of all the neighbor kids' parents. So we have Beth's dad to thank for that. Can I have a round of applause for all four of them, please? Okay, so Eric liked that story. So we are going to spend the next hour answering the questions that came to us via the moderator and Twitter and a few other sources, looking at some trends that are going on. And then at about 4:30, we're going to transition to live Q&A. So part of the reason I wanted to take time to introduce you to each of these panelists is so that you really had a sense of both the depth and the breadth and the resource that you have in front of you. Paul needs to exit stage left, literally, at 4:30. The rest of them will be staying. All right, so we'll be sort of answering the questions, and I want to give a shout out to the co-curators who took the time to figure out how to take all those different questions and give them some themes, which was Peter Drury. He's at Seattle Drury. He's the development director at Splash. Yay! Zan McCulloch-Lucier, who's now with Food Lifeline at Zanorama. And a special shout out to Shannon Doolittle, who was in the back of the room. SL Doolittle, yeah. There she is. She helped us on the question. She also is the reason that, like, we're here, we're sitting in things and everything. She's really the brains and the brawn behind the operation, so that's Shannon. So it seemed like we were going to have a conversation about data and transparency and impact, that it was important to define impact, because it means a lot of things to a lot of different people. So I'm a word nerd, so I busted out my dictionary, my Old English dictionary, and the second definition I just want to say, but was a market effect or influence. So I was curious, and Paul, if we can start with you, when you think about impact, how do you define it?
Sure. So I think there are sort of two levels to it. At one level, it's really not that hard, which is, so we work with kids' education environmental organizations. And when we think about, for example, kids' organizations, we're trying to work with organizations that are measuring attitudinal, behavioral, academic, familial changes in that kid's life, right? And for example, we work with powerful schools, and they can measure kindergarten readiness. They can measure proficiency in third grade reading. They can measure kids' motivations to succeed in school. And most groups that we work with, when we fund capacity building, they can build a theory of change to say what's their impact. So I think actually defining impact in one level is not that hard. It's a very intentional thing that an organization can do. At another level, it's incredibly hard, because if you get around to then what is the end game of that data that I've collected, what's the attribution around that data, what's the quality of the data that goes into measuring impact, how do I integrate that data for a kid or for a community, how do I create access to that data, how do I create meaning out of that data and that impact, it gets incredibly complex and it gets incredibly hard.
That's your answer, it's hard. Is measuring impact just about proving it, or is it about improving it?
Right. So when we invested and fund it, you would say for a funder it's for proving it, but at the end of the game, the greatest value should be about improving it, right? Any reason any organization has data should be to inform its practice and its service and its product and improve it. So that would be the idea. It's a management tool. It's a feedback tool for the organization, which, by the way, also can hopefully communicate its impact to the external world.
Eric is someone with a website called provingit.org. I was just curious if you just wanted to,
That's awesome. I think we get confused between mission statements, vision statements, and what an actual outcome is. I think we spend a lot of time talking about inputs and outputs. For our organization, we could easily just say to you, we have served in our lifespan as an organization 500,000 kids. That could pass as our outcome. It's not. It truly isn't. It's how many kids today are served water. I heard someone at your talk this morning behind me mention that Tom's Shoes, they were going into a new country and they were going to serve 1 million kids. I don't give a shit. It's how many kids have shoes now. How many of those shoes failed? How have they supported local economies? How have they employed new enterprises? How are they actually scaling? But more importantly, it's how many kids today have clean water for us. How many kids for Tom's have new shoes that are protecting them day in, day out. And so I think we just get lost in this inputs versus outcomes, and outcomes is far more important. And they're really, I think they're dynamically tough for most organizations to articulate. Like right now, any donor of any organization, including mine, can you tell me what our outcome measurements are, what our impact model is? You can probably tell me what my vision statement and mission statements are, but I think most people would be really hard-pressed to say what our actual long-term outcomes are. Yeah.
That's one of the things that makes this work so hard, right? I came out of the private sector, I'm sure many of you did, and earnings per share is a beautiful, beautiful thing, right? It's one thing, it's one number, I know how to measure it, that's the end game. And the work that we all do does not have one end game. I need outcomes, I'm with you on that totally. And even when I got the outcomes, right, how do I put that together? How do I draw a picture with it? How do I know what the end game it's really added up to? How do I know how good the data is that got me to that outcome, et cetera? So I'm with you on outcomes, and then the complexity comes in. How do I add those outcomes together to add up to something for my organization's work?
pivot off of and course correct.
Yep, yep.
I think from the funder's perspective, then what happens when you're investing across many different missions and how you aggregate impact across those different missions is hard. So if you're investing from puppies to kitties to kids, how do you think about impact and aggregate that up to say what you're doing in the space and how you're funding and how you're having an impact in the community? That's also, then you're having to think about qualitative impact and how you're bringing in those stories and aggregating stories as opposed to data.
So follow up in the spirit of easier said than done. Bill Gates, a few weeks ago, put out his 2013 annual letter, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the whole theme of it was measuring progress. So he says in there, you can achieve amazing progress if you set a clear goal and find a measure to drive progress toward that goal. Which sounds great, and then you start trying to do it. So, one of the things that came out loud and clear from the questions that we got in advance was a sense of like deer in headlights. Wow, okay, I want to, but that feels overwhelming. So and Beth, I'm hoping you'll lead us off on this. What advice would you give to organizations who want to be data informed, as you say, not just data driven, but data informed? How do they know what the quote unquote right data is for them to be gathering and looking at?
That's a great question, and it's one that I spent a year thinking about with my co-author.
Did we mention Beth has a book?
But we have these 7 simple steps of measurement. And the first step is really defining success. And for a lot of organizations, that's kind of easy because it relates back to the mission. So what are these overall big results? What are the changes that we want to see? As that's the easy part, as Paul was talking about. And then we're going through and figuring how much time is it going? Are we investing in this? And then what is our measurable goal? What is that that metric that we're going to track? That's the hard part, especially how it gets translated from different points of view in the organization. But the way to make it easy is instead of it calling it a key performance indicator, call it a KBI, and that's a kicking butt indicator, since we're talking about butts. So what is it? What is it that? Well, okay. What is it? What would have to happen? Have this conversation with your team. Lock them up in a room. Get a whiteboard and ask, what will we see to make us say, wow, we're really kicked butt? To have your board of directors call you in and said, okay, everybody, open the champagne, take a month off because you have done a fantastic job. And also, on the other hand, to ask the question, wow, we're really getting our butt kicked. What would that failure look like? And then you kind of bring it down to what are those 1 or 2 data points that are going to tell us that we've achieved that we need to take the measure along the way. And what happens is that a lot of it, that's hard to do. That's the hard part. And it takes patience, it takes a little bit of discipline, and it's much more easy to talk about the data tool and all these other metrics that we're collecting, and we kind of get distracted. But I would challenge people to really, sit with that conversation, not just once, but over several sessions, and don't do anything else until you have that defined.
Do any of you have examples of organizations that have kick butt indicators and are using them regularly?
It's an evolving field.
Well, I just gave you one, Powerful Schools, right? I think that they have a set of, you can point to lots of organizations, I think, really that do a pretty decent job of it. We worked with home builders several years ago, and they have very specific outcomes. If you go look at David Hawkins' work at UW, they've looked at organizations that have incredibly deep data test and control on youth violence prevention, et cetera, right? So there are great organizations out there. He put them into communitiesthatcare.net. There, I think, are actually a lot of organizations out there that do a pretty good job with it. There's still many more to go, but I think there's a lot of organizations that do a good job. Per your conversation, what Beth just said, what I also think is really important is no matter how hard it is, and kind of per Mr. Gates' letter, no matter how hard it is, no matter how kind of hard it is to get to the outcome, you still got to try. Then we'll get to can we fund it, but you still got to try to measure what you can measure, right? You have got to, the fact that it's hard or it's difficult to get the data is not a reason to say, therefore, I'm not going to try to measure it. You got to try to measure. It may not be perfect, it may not be the end game, but you can't say, because it's hard, I can't measure.
And that's,
I was just going to say, absolutely. I think how how dare any of us give money to someone who can't prove that they're doing any social good? And if you can't define and measure impact, how in fact are you raising money? Sorry, I mean that literally. I mean, if someone can't define what they're doing socially, the change that's happening in the society from their direct intervention.
And I was going to
How can they
say
be a 501c3?
that, yeah, measurement can be hard. I mean, I'm not a natural measurer. In fact, the first line in the book is, I used to think measurement was the equivalent of Darth Vader chasing after me with a radioactive lightsaber. I mean, I didn't know my way about Excel. I'm not a math girl, and I know as I've gone out and talked about this, I know that there are a lot of people in nonprofits, they didn't start to do this work because they love spreadsheets, with all due respect to Microsoft. They didn't, they're a passion for social change. But we need more, social change people with passion for spreadsheets. And so the point is that you can start to do measurement, and you can start very simply. And in fact, that would be the advice, to start with these smaller pilots. Don't try to measure every single goal. Don't try to collect every metric. And try something that, if you're first starting, try an easy win. There's nothing wrong with that, to get in the habit and the skill set of measurement.
I think Start Easy is a good one. Vitana, you guys are familiar with Vitana? I was having coffee with them recently, and they were talking about, it can measure the impact of giving this kid a scholarship and the increase in their wage. It's very easy to measure, they can do it. But the ripple effect around that you spoke of, how do you measure the impact then on their family? That his younger sisters now get to go to school because he's earning, and their family now has a roof because he's earning a higher wage. And how do you measure that? But start with that thing that's really solid and concrete, and then figure out how to go the ripple around it.
So then, because what I heard you saying, Eric, and I don't know if they turned off his mic before he said they should take away their 501c3 status if they can't prove social good. But how do you, right? So the farther up the logic model food chain you go, the more expensive and the tougher it is to get those metrics. And so, and then what I'm hearing Beth say is, and Shane say, try something small and be able to prove it. And then you're going to get into sort of anecdotal, this is the impact on one family. So would that be good enough?
I guess using our organization as an example, so we have 3 primary long-term outcomes. It's better health and development for the kids we serve, local ownership, and theft. We really want people to steal our model, plagiarize it, make it better, and kick our butts in the process of doing it. Local ownership, you're talking about supply chains, distributions, service economies, building out the local organizations to take this on past us. And better in health and development, you're using proxies like clean water that lasts, hygiene that lasts, sanitation that lasts, an increase of those populations that are actually using this. So you can use immediate term M&E kind of metrics to act as proxy indicators towards those long-term outcomes, and none of those are hard. Again, 3, better health and development, that's a really hard one on the surface from right here. I mean, that's a multi-year kind of goal. But you can take these little incremental pieces in months or even sometimes single-digit weeks and figure out if you're going towards those goals. I think it's doable.
Your use of the word proxy is interesting because I think nonprofits have a hard time using the idea of a proxy in their data collection. They want it to be specific and hard, where in fact, you might need to use a proxy to get that impact.
They're long term. You can't see them now.
Right.
And we're trying to look around corners effectively, and the only way we can do that is to use those proxies.
Yep.
Yep.
So that's
I totally thought you were going to bust out with dummy variable.
dummy variable.
Really? That's where I thought you were going.
Heteroscedasticity.
Well, I was going to say, don't measure the ocean. If you can, if you don't have the capacity and the resources to measure the ocean, maybe you measure one beach.
Beth, will you share your crawl, walk, run, fly? It's really handy.
And it's very funny because I actually first shared it here 2 years ago at the Washington Tech for Good conference, and it was inspired by many years of doing capacity building and technology for nonprofits, and a Martin Luther King quote, which is, if you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't run, then crawl, but you got to keep moving forward. And so many years ago, when I started doing technology, I would make all nonprofits try to fly right away, and they'd all fall down. And so I've been working very hard to look at what are the incremental baby steps that we can start with at crawling, and what does that look like in terms of measurement. So I have a maturity of practice model for network nonprofits with about 15 different areas of practice. And it goes from culture, capacity, listening, engagement, content. And it's a rubric, basically. So if you're doing a content strategy and you're at the crawl level, what does that look like? And what do you need to get to the walking level? So Should I get more
Is that in a
specific?
spreadsheet?
It's actually, not only is it in a spreadsheet, but I have now taken
Are there
it.
pivot tables, Beth?
Yes, there are. Those pivot tables changed my life. But I've been talking about this, and I use it as a, I've been using it in workshops, but now I've taken the instrument and I'm in the process of validating measures. So an organization can take this assessment and come up with scores in each of the areas. And I've been also using it as a benchmarking tool. Right now I have about a group of 200 World Health nonprofits. Their social media people are benchmarking all their organizations so they can come up with, wow, our average score for engagement tactics is a 2.5. And so if my individual score is a 3, then I'm doing well. And let's look at all the 3s and look at what their best practices are.
So the benchmarking allows individual organizations to peg themselves to a cohort?
Right, and to compare themselves, because measurement is a comparative art. And also, it helps you uncover best practices, and it also helps you define where you may want to bolster some weaknesses.
Do you have an anecdotal story of an organization that has started crawling and is now flying? Or just crawl to walk? Or walk to...
Well, I have one of a crawl to walk, and it's with social media and measurement. So, because that's a lot of where my work is. It is a arts organization that's in San Francisco, and they serve Asian artists in the community, and they have 2 people on staff. They have a director and an assistant director, and both of them do everything, including cleaning the bathrooms. I don't know if that's familiar to some of you in the audience.
Sound familiar?
Yes. Okay.
Washroom washers?
So they were first like, we don't have time to measure, we don't have time to do this. And then they decided, okay, we're going to get over our denial and we're going to start to measure, because if we measure it, our social media effectiveness will know where to spend our time, and we'll make better decisions. So they started very simply. They chose one channel, Facebook in this sense, and they set their objectives were to increase awareness, to get more people into exhibitions, and to increase engagement. And so they just started tracking their content according to how many more people are aware of it, how many people are engaging with us, are those comments on topic related to our exhibitions. And then they also started surveying people who were coming up to their shows, how did you hear about us? Did you hear about us, on Facebook first? And so this gave them kind of a framework to, practice with baby steps on a measurement cycle around their content. So now they're actually ready to apply this to other channels and to other ways of working.
Anything else come to mind on that? Okay. So we've talked about impact. We talked about data and how that relates to impact. So now I want to introduce this idea of transparency, right? So sometimes when you're data informed and you're gathering data, you get bad news. Right? It's not all unicorns and rainbows. So it's hard enough when you get bad news when you're in the privacy of your office or your whatever. But transparency sort of implies that you would fail out loud, right? That you would do that very publicly. And so I'm wondering, and Eric, I'm hoping you'll start us off on this since Splash has been doing this, but sort of what's the value proposition, or what do you say to organizations to motivate them to start really not just gathering the data, which would be great, but then being very transparent about it?
I'd start with the word failure. And man, it's such a harsh word, isn't it? It's like every organization obviously fails. We're continually evolving, but there's this just natural gravitation towards that word lately. In terms of transparency, so we started this external system called Proving It. It's been about 1.5 years now. And it was initially started up internally because we were a bunch of program dudes, right? We needed to assure donors here that in fact charitable work was happening internationally. And so we'd have our international staff putting in project logs, updates, all our M&E standardized surveys into this system. And at one point during the development, we decided to just make it completely open externally to general public, as well as defining when a donor gives to us, we attribute that donor's name or that organization or multiple users full access. So right now, the way the system works, when we get what would be considered a fail log, when something stops functioning,